Welcome to Pre-Consent, the history show where we examine life in the pre-contractual era. Today we're looking at one of the defining institutions of that period, governments. Now, if you studied the first half of the 21st century or watched historical dramas set during the late state era, you may have heard terms like government, state, or public authority before. You may have seen people standing in lines, filling out forms, asking for permission to build things, being captured or drafted, or arguing over who should be allowed to manage everyone's life for the next 4 years. Naturally, younger viewers often ask, what exactly were these people doing? That is a very reasonable question. A government, or more precisely a state, was an institution that claimed final authority over everyone inside a geographic territory. This group claimed the right to make rules for you. They would make you pay them, which was called being taxed, and they would regulate you, punish you, and sometimes even send you to war. All of that was done by different branches claiming authority under one organization. Now, younger viewers often ask me, wait, people voluntarily joined these organizations? No. In most cases, you were simply born inside a territory, and then the institution that claimed jurisdiction over that territory effectively also claimed your life. Today, of course, legal and protection services are based on voluntary contract, reputation, and competition. Back then, the idea of living how we do today was considered dangerously radical. As I said, you were forced to pay something called taxes, which was money taken from your earnings, ostensibly to fund services, whether you wanted those services or not. Of course, a good fraction of it was squandered by the authorities. You're probably wondering, could people opt out and choose alternatives? No. In fact, competition for the things the government ran were restricted, if not outright prohibited, and there were a lot of things it managed directly. Money, courts, police, schools, roads and infrastructure, and more. Of the things that were permitted to stay in the market, most of them were distorted by state subsidies and other policies meant to manipulate outcomes. The government also decided when millions of people would go to war, which really deserves its own video. In short, it was like a giant fight between two states, although the attacks were often on regular people. But interestingly, most of the lives lost to government were lost outside war, which is called democide. At this point, students usually ask a very natural follow-up. Okay, there was a lot of coercion and injustice, but did this system at least work well in some ways? And the answer is not really. Centralized states created constant problems with incentives, corruption, waste, war, debt, enforcement, and political favoritism. Because the state did not earn revenue by satisfying consumers in a competitive market, it had very different incentives from ordinary service providers. Now, I bet you're wondering, wouldn't that interfere with price signals? Yes, very often. When states taxed, subsidized, regulated, inflated currency, restricted competitors, or redirected resources by political command, they distorted signals people usually use to decide what should be produced, how much, by whom, and at what cost. But economic education was not very widespread in the pre-contractual era. Most people understood prices as numbers that authorities could adjust, rather than signals emerging from human action, scarcity, preferences, and exchange. Today, if a defense agency, arbitrator, insurer, school, or infrastructure provider starts behaving badly, people can leave. They can sue, boycott, refuse contracts, or choose competitors. Ancient states handled this problem by simply making competitors illegal. Students always ask, surely people question this arrangement? Oh, constantly, all the time. But people had been taught since childhood that society would collapse without centralized authority. The reality that we live in every day was said to be impossible because without legitimate rulers, everything would fall apart. This was one of the state's most impressive achievements. It did not merely use force, it also produced legitimacy through narratives. In some eras, rulers claimed divine approval. In others, they claimed bloodline authority, historical destiny, national unity, emergency necessity, or most notably, the will of the people, which they called democracy. Democracy was especially important in the later state period because it allowed people to feel that being ruled by an institution was somehow different if they had been allowed to vote on which faction would manage it. This made the arrangement feel participatory, even though the basic structure remained the same. One institution claimed final authority over everyone in a territory. A common phrase from the era was, without government, who would build the roads? Historians now classify this as a ritual response. Perhaps strangest of all, people often believed they were completely free while needing permission for business, building, travel, trade, education, and occasionally what plants they could grow, or what adults could ingest. Today, peaceful adults make their own choices and bear responsibility for them, of course. Back then, the state often claimed your body as somehow part of its jurisdiction. The pre-contractual era was as fascinating as it was horrific and brutal, which is why it continues to capture people's imaginations to this day.